So I'd love to introduce to you Elisa Moondragon. She's an eclectic witch and priestess. She's a magical essential oil practitioner and a moon priestess who discovered goddess while working as an actor at the Maryland Renaissance Festival. Raise your hand if the Ren Fair was your gateway. I feel it. This began her magical journey that has led her in many directions over the last 30 years. Ever curious and wanting to learn more, Elisa has studied Santeria. She's worked with elders from the Lakota Sioux tribe. She's half Japanese, and she also honors her Shinto ancestors. Elisa has actively participated in and studied with many different goddess and pagan groups, including Women Wheel NYC, Earth Spirit in Massachusetts, the Binghamton Pagan Group. Hey, I didn't know that. Yeah. In New York, Goddess Tree and Mystic Grove in Virginia, and the Mother House of the Goddess online, as well as the Mount Shasta Goddess Temple. She's conducted large group rituals and has led workshops and classes about the goddess, moon magic, and moon lore. She's also an experienced life coach and spiritual mentor. She helps women discover the goddess and her magic in all facets of their lives to create balance, happiness, and success. She completed the Mother House of the Goddess Priestess training in 2022, and she and her delightful partner, Rick, moved out west from Virginia and New York in 2015. And now they are settled in two beautiful tiny houses near the foot of Mount Hood in Oregon. Two beautiful tiny houses sounds like Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir's relationship. Like they had their own houses. It's so powerful. Everyone, the power of having not one she shed, but two. Very powerful.
A shed and a she shed.
A he shed and a she shed. Well, thank you so much, Elisa. We're really looking forward to Nut, Egyptian goddess of the night sky.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So this is an introduction to the sky goddess Nut. Let me see if I can't. Okay, sorry, but my screen's a little on here. You'll see the Zoom, but that's okay. Hello, Zoom people. This is an introduction to the sky goddess Nut. Today, we're going to be talking about Nut's origins, who is Nut, and how she came to be the galactic mother goddess, sky goddess, mistress of all. We will be talking about Nut's creation story and her relationship with Ra, Nut and her association with Hathor and Isis in the Egyptian pantheon. We'll also talk about modern interpretations of Nut. You'll see a spelling N-U-I-T, Nut. We'll talk about that and how to acknowledge Nut and bring her into your life. So in the beginning here, there was the Nun or Nun. It was a primordial ooze, basically, the primordial ocean. It also was an unformed darkness. So it was just kind of a void. And mind you, there were limits of which were unknown. And finally, it was a chaotic place of non-being, but there were small currents of potential. And this is a quote from a coffin that was found in Egypt: "The font of the gods, the place from which birds come." And I'm talking about the sky, not the ocean. The Egyptians didn't have an ocean to look at, most of them, but they had something else. They had the sky. So from this primordial ooze in the sky, as the Egyptians were looking up at night and looking at the constellations, and we were talking really back in the Neolithic, there was the creator cow goddess. For them, they saw the cow on the earth. And then they put her in the sky because the cow meant everything to them. The cow provided fertility. The cow nurtured her young. The cow also, Rehet, means great swimmer. So as she swam across the Nile, she also swam across the sky. And she was the fertile current in the pre-creation Nun, the fertile current, just that little bit. She was nurturing, as I said, and protecting. She represented fertility and rebirth. And she was, to the Egyptians, the earliest manifestation of the mother goddess. She was the cosmic cow. So when I talk about the Egyptians looking up at the sky, they saw the Milky Way. And that was what they saw at night, was this beautiful arcing galaxy of the Milky Way. And in an interesting twist, although this is a very modern photograph, this is the Nile at night. So you can see that they equated their Nile with the Milky Way. So actually in the early days, this was one. This was their universe. This is how it all was coalesced into one. One represented the other. So it was because of that in the very, very early, probably even prior to the Old Kingdom, Nut was the sky goddess. They recognized her as a goddess of one who gives rebirth, fertility, protection. She was part of the sky and also part of them. So let's go into some titles of Nut. There's a lot of titles that span, and you have to remember that we talk about ancient Egypt, but we're talking about here from the Neolithic until the pre-Christian era. We're talking almost 4,000 years, 3,500 years. The myths change over time. So you might be hearing me say some things that are from the older kingdom or the newer, the middle kingdom. So Nut morphed over time, but these are many of her epithets. Cover of the sky, she who protects, mistress of all, goddess of death. Remember, there's that rebirth. Mistress of the heavens, the goddess of winding waterway, the Milky Way. Lady of Heliopolis, mistress of two lands, sky goddess, encloser of the frightened. She was a protector. My ancient Egyptian's not so good here. Shenatayet, mysterious one. And Nut, the granary, because she brought forth food. And the effective one. So these are all many, and there's many more epithets that are carved in tombs, that are in writings. She was a many-faceted and long-lived goddess. So what's the importance of Nut? Nut played a major role in protecting the earth from destructive forces in the cosmos, such as the chaos serpent, Apophis. She keeps order. The ancient Egyptians were all about order and making sure that there was calm out of the chaos. And that's what Nut provided. She provided that order. This Egyptian understanding led to storytelling, timekeeping, navigation, and astronomy. There is something called the Book of Nut, which is basically all of the observations of the sky constellations. It is considered the very, very beginnings of astronomy. Nut also gives birth to Ra in the morning, each morning, and she swallows him up at night. And that was the creation of night and sky, or day and night, excuse me. And we'll go into that myth a little later. So the origins of Nut, again, ancient Egyptian mythology has morphed over time as pharaohs came in. They wanted more prominent roles in the myths and whatnot. So I'm going to be talking about a few of the very early myths and then kind of that morphing into what we know as Ra. So who is Nut? She's considered one of the oldest deities of the Egyptian pantheon. Nut is part of the cosmology of Heliopolis, which is their original theory of origin. That's kind of their origin story. It's very old. In some myths, Nut is the granddaughter of Atum, who Yesha mentioned, or she is the granddaughter of Ra. That's probably later, probably in the Middle to New Kingdom, the sun god. Nut is a daughter of god Shu, which is air, and goddess Tefnut or Tefnet, moisture, so air and moisture. Nut protected the earth deity Geb, which was her husband and her brother, from the night sky and chaos. Remember, the Egyptians wanted order. So she arched over the sky to protect the earth and keep it from chaos. Nut is also one of the very few goddesses who have offspring. Osiris, Set or Seth, Isis, and Nephthys, and later Horus the Elder. It's very unusual for a deity to have this many children. So I'm going to talk about a very old origin story, the Ened, which were the original deities. One of the myths regarding the creation of the world. So over here on the far left top corner is Atum, and he was, as Yesha said, he stepped from the ooze into the earth and he created, so that was his creation. And his consort was Tefnut, second to the left on the top row here. She was his consort, and they had children, which was Geb and Nut. They were twins. They were born intertwined together. They were not separate at the time. And also then the original Osiris, Isis, Seth or Set, and Nephthys. So this is an older myth, probably going back to the beginning of the Old Kingdom. So we're talking very, very long ago. And you can also see in this picture too, already Nut is holding up. She's holding up, and we'll talk more about why she's in that position. So this is the story of Nut and Ra. Ra probably came to prominence a little later after that original creation myth. The Egyptian, so in this telling, the Egyptian year was only 360 days. Ra, the sun god, decreed, Nut shall not give birth on any day of the year. But at that time, she was already pregnant with Osiris. So Nut spoke to Thoth, who's the god of wisdom, and she devised a plan. Actually, together they devised a plan. So Thoth gambled with Khonsu, which is the god of the moon. The moon in Egyptian mythology is a male deity. And his light rivaled Ra. And every time Khonsu lost, he gave Thoth more of his moonlight. So Khonsu lost so many times that Thoth was able to give Nut enough light for 5 extra days, 365 days. Those extra days are represented by her children. And her children are Osiris, who became the ruler of the gods and then god of the dead. He is also the husband to Isis, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with that myth. Horus the Elder, god of war. Horus the Elder came in a little later, again, as the myth evolved over thousands of years. Horus the Elder came in as one of Nut's children. Set or Seth, god of discord and the desert. Isis, goddess of magic. And Nephthys, goddess of water. So let's talk a little bit about Nut and Geb. Just want to show, as we have this picture here, Nut is arcing over the sky. The symbols underneath are, you'll see in a minute, Shu is holding with his arms like this. He is keeping Nut from Geb. Geb is on the ground. And this was the deal that was struck up. Nut and Geb, since she was already pregnant with children, they had to be separated. She created the sky, Geb was the earth, but Shu is always in the air. He is the air. He is always separating the two. So as I said, they were twins. They were born intertwined. Ra told Shu, their father, to separate them after birth so earth could develop in this myth. It is the god Shu who provides the barrier between Nut and Geb. After Ra found out about Nut's pregnancies and the additional 5 days she was able to create with Thoth, Ra relegated Nut to the sky and Geb to the earth, together but forever separate. But now they could mate on those 5 extra days, and they produced their children. Geb is sometimes depicted as a snake or the head of a goose. I'll show you some hieroglyphics later that are associated with Nut, and there is a goose. And I believe also the goose is associated later on with pharaonic royalty. So again, these myths were created and then morphed over years. So we'll talk about some of the symbols of Nut today. We'll come back to this picture in a minute, but this was this was probably in her later to middle to later time because of all the symbols that she's surrounded with here. And we'll talk about those. So here are some symbols of Nut. The Wadjet eye, and I'll go back to that picture. There is that classic Egyptian eye. That is actually a feminine noun, and it associates itself with goddess or a goddess. So when you see the Wadjet eye in certain circumstances that's over or near a goddess, you're signifying she is feminine and she is a goddess. Nut is also shown many times with a vessel on her head, and many people take it as the womb. She is the ultimate mother. This is her womb. It also contains life-giving properties too, and that's why she's got that vessel. Sometimes she's depicted with an ovid. It's kind of like an oval circle over her head. And that's also considered the womb of Nut. And it's also shown within the ovid, oftentimes a loaf of bread and then a small vessel as well. So the essence of life, so to speak, bread and water. She's shown sometimes, as in the photograph I just showed you, she's with wings, which is similar to Isis. And sometimes that's confusing, but Isis is Nut's daughter. So you can see how that carried down. At other times, she's depicted as a vulture, which is really unusual because in some of the coffin or the tomb drawings, you don't necessarily see Nut stretched across the sky, but you'll see the vulture. She is the vulture. Why? Because she receives the dead on their way to their afterlife. She is the first one to lift up the dead into the heavens, and they can start their journey in the afterlife. She's also one of the only goddesses in the Egyptian pantheon that's represented in some instances as nude. When she's arched over the sky, she does not have clothes on, and there are other depictions of her as nude. Most of the Egyptian deities have some form of clothing. Obviously, bent over the sky, very common. Stars. So oftentimes, if you go into some of these older tombs, you may, again, not see Nut herself, but you see the stars, and they're five-pointed, and that represents, obviously, the heavens, but the heavens are Nut. And then finally, in some depictions, there is something called a maquette, which is a sacred ladder that leads up to the stars and into the afterlife. And there are some phrases on tombs and coffins about, dear Nut, please take me up the ladder. Please take me up to be reborn again. And that is, after the soul leaves, that is their way up to the heavens. So here's some more images of Nut. Here we go. This is a later depiction of her because she does have clothes on, but you can see her wings. And what differentiates her between Isis is that Isis has that royal headdress, and Nut does not in this depiction. This is also a picture of Nut on the ceiling in one of the temples, and you can see her. She is in that classic bent over position. And I'll talk more about this specific picture a little later. And here is Nut, nude, with a vessel on her head. Like I said, this is a very unusual depiction of an Egyptian deity without any clothes. And it meant something. She was the mother. She was the ultimate. She didn't need clothes. This is Nut as the vulture of death. Again, you see the vulture's wings are almost like the wings here that's depicted on the left. And then if you look, I know this picture is not real clear, but the vulture at the top of its beak has these little ovids here. And the ovids, one of them is a container. Also the scarab, the Egyptian scarab, which meant everlasting life and that type of thing. But again, this is more unusual. You will not see this very often, but when it is there, it means that Nut is present. So going back to this original illustration, you can see the Wadjet eye on each side, signifying that she is goddess. You see the ovid over her head. And again, it's a little hard to see in this, but there is a tiny little vessel. There's a loaf of bread. And I believe this bottom kind of horizontal might actually depict the actual ark. So again, the ovid is very important when you see depictions of Nut. Notice that in this depiction, she is closed again. It's probably a later depiction of Nut. So let's talk about Nut and Hathor, because Hathor has many commonalities to Nut. This is a beautiful illustration, and I will go into more detail a little late, just a minute here. But I just want to point out that it's actually kind of difficult to figure out which one is Nut and which one is Hathor. And even in some of the readings that I have done the research, there's a lot of talk about who's who. And the reason why is because they, in many ways, kind of came together as one, but they are still considered separate. And it would be easier to think of Nut as the universal mother and Hathor as the mother on earth. So the Egyptians believed that Nut would emerge from the sycamore tree when the Ba, or the Ka, the soul, rested in the tree's shade, and the sycamore tree would give it nourishment on its way up to the heavens. She, in this picture, and I'll go back here, she holds in her hand grapes, a vessel, which I think is beer, onions. These are all symbols of feasting, fertility, life, and the giving of life on earth. She also, you'll see back in this picture here, there are papyrus stems. So that's also a common representation of Nut and Hathor, actually. And then she's also referred to as tree goddess. Nut is referred to as tree goddess. But that title, depending on where it is, how it's written, who it's representing in death, it could be either Nut, Hathor, or Isis. And again, over thousands of years, these myths morphed and changed. So sometimes, especially in a transitional period, like in this picture here, you're not quite sure who is who, but you know that it is a royal deity depiction. And then again, I will go back, there is an illustration, you'll see some type of tree here. So that is the sycamore tree. And mind you, sycamores grow right near water on the Nile. So again, it's all connected. So Nut and Hathor's relationship is an important one. Nut was originally the sacred cow goddess, and later that title was given to Hathor. Nut and Hathor are mothers, mother of the universe, mother of the earth. Hathor is almost always depicted in ceiling motifs, and Nut with her face on the earth as a cow, motifs of Nut on the ceiling, and then Hathor is depicted as the cow with Nut above her. Okay, and in this picture here, this is taken at Dendera Temple, which is dedicated to Hathor and Isis. You'll see that these beautiful, huge columns are carved with the face of Hathor, and she's right up there, right under Nut. I hope we can do this. This is a video that I shot while I was in Egypt. I had to turn it on its side so you could see. So we're going to try to see. Here we go. So as I'm looking up, this was on the ceiling in Dendera. This is the classical depiction of Nut. I'll play it again. It's a very short video, so let me go back and. Do you really? Yeah. And your neck can't take much more, because you're like. Ugh. But anyway, you see Nut here, her face and arms, and then these people in the center are all the people on their journey into the afterlife. And then you see her feet at the bottom. So it's a stunning when you look up and you just feel like, I don't know, you just feel like you're protected. You feel like she's there with you. So when I was very fortunate to travel with my husband back in November of 2023 to Egypt, it was the trip of a lifetime. And one of the temples we visited was Dendera. And Dendera is dedicated to Hathor. And again, it was not built in the early days of the ancient Egyptian kingdom. I think this was at the very end of the middle into the new kingdom. So we're talking probably about 2,000 to 1,500 years before Christ. And so this temple was considered relatively modern, and it was a little different than some of the other temples. One of the differences was in the complex was a small temple off to the side, kind of behind the main temple. And it was the temple of Isis. And this was the temple that celebrated the birth of Isis. And it also represented women and birth. It was just the whole factor of birth, and that Isis was birthed by Nut. And she, in turn, she birthed not Hathor, she birthed Horus. So when you go into the temple, it's very tall and very narrow. And you put your arms in these rings on either side, and you're kind of like arched back like this. And I do believe that in some way it was a birthing position. I wouldn't like to give birth like that, but you know, it was a birthing position. But the main thing was when you looked up, this is what you saw. And it's massive. It's just massive in its scale. But let me talk to you a little bit about what's in this picture. It might be hard to see a few things. So you see that Nut is bent over. She's arcing and she's protecting the earth. You see that the sun is coming down and those were rays. The moon is also right next to her face, if you can see on the far end here. And then this might be a little difficult, but there are very light traces. And I believe that these are sycamore branches or sycamore trees. And they're a little lower down because we're talking now the earth aspect and Hathor. Hathor is represented in that picture right there. And Hathor then, she's receiving the rays of the sun. She is protected by Nut, and you can tell her importance as far as Nut is concerned. But the two branches here on the side, right in between, like right over here by her arms, if you can't see, and right in the sun rays itself, those are sycamore branches. So this was a wonderful quote from a book that I read about Nut. I think it sums it up very well. Goddess Nut, she now holds within her galaxies beyond our seeing and marvels beyond our understanding, whose star-jeweled sky uplifts our souls with its splendor and beauty, whose night soft wings enfold us in comfort and protection, who holds out her hands to lift us back to the stars. There is no ending of the great goddess Nut, no ending of her wonders and of her embrace. She will never be far from us, ever. And that's a wonderful quote, you know, because you do feel very comforted when you look up to the sky and know that one day you come from the sky and you will return to that sky. So let's talk a little bit of some modern interpretations of Nut. And by modern, I mean late 19th century into the early 20th century. You can see here on the right is the star, as we're all pretty much familiar with the Rider-Waite deck. And then here is another card from a more Thelemic deck that shows Nut, N-U-I-T, also arcing over that arcing position with stars. Also, you can see at the top of this particular card, she's got the bread and the vessel. And then she's got the sign of Aquarius here. And again, star. All these are star interpretations. So the Book of the Law, Goddess Nut. Nut, N-U-I-T, is a goddess in Thelema, speaking in the first person in the Book of the Law. The sacred text was written or channeled by Aleister Crowley in 1904. So as much as people have opinions about Aleister Crowley, he was a marvelous magician and very, very prolific in his writings about Thelemic practice and especially Nut. Nut is part of a triadic cosmology consisting of Hadit, her masculine counterpart, and Ra Hor Kut, the crowned and conquering child. And I wanted to show this little picture over here on the side. Nut this is a later interpretation of Nut, probably almost at the time of the Ptolemaic. So very close to the end of the New Kingdom. She's arched over. In this case, she has Horus is sitting on the throne. That's Horus the Elder. And then I believe the figure there that might be hidden, sorry about that, is the god Hadit. So in Crowley's interpretation, it was a trifecta. It was a triangle. Nut is referred to as the Queen of Heaven and the Queen of Space. Well, again, why is this so important now? Well, his writings, right or wrong, whether you agree with them or not, or like them or not, spurred on a tremendous occult interest in the late 19th and early 20th century. And because of that, we have the Rider-Waite deck. We have a lot of other things. So guess what? Nut made it into the 20th century. Again, the Thelemic tradition and influence. Nut and Hadith, the Thelemic version of the myth, Nut and Geb, the great work. This is, some people call it the great rite, but I think in a larger interpretation, it's the creative forces coming together to bring the highest good. So that's what his focus was. And here's a quote from his book of when Nut is speaking. I am the blue-lidded daughter of sunset. I am the naked brilliance of the voluptuous night sky. And he also writes, note that heaven is not where gods live. Nut is heaven itself. Nut, again, as we saw on the tarot card, she is the star goddess, the imagery of Nut, and she is also, noticed the star goddess is Nut too, right? So that was carried over. And then she represents also, the star goddess is the zodiac sign of Aquarius, reminiscent of Nut and astronomy, but now depicted as astrology. So I've talked about the history of Nut, the myths of Nut, illustrations of Nut. But you know what? You can bring Nut into your personal practice. So many images out there now that you can go to and find interpretations of Nut. I think all of them are beautiful and modern. And actually, I think Nut would be very pleased. So what can you do? First thing, look up. Celebrate the night sky. She is the Milky Way. And every time you look at that, know that you came from that and you will go back to it. Animals that are sacred to Nut, obviously the cow. Also a sow and piglets, because that represents fertility. Bees, frogs, and rabbits. They represent the mother, generosity, fertility, and birth. You can also use blue lotus flowers. It's not as easy to get papyrus, but certainly blue lotus represents the deities and royalty, and blue is beautiful. So that represents Nut. You can make tea and perfume. Those are symbols of Isis and Hathor as well. So you're honoring Nut, but you're also honoring the earth deities, Isis and Hathor. So you're bringing it, by using those instruments, you're bringing Nut down into yourself in a very personal way. Obviously, gems such as lapis, turquoise, sapphire, blue topaz, and opal represent Nut. And the colors black, blue, all shades of blue are also colors that represent Nut. A couple years ago, I led an Astar ritual with Mother House of the Goddess, and I did an invocation to Nut. And I put this here because it's a very simple invocation. You don't have to be fancy. What I said was, I call upon the above and to the goddess of the stars, beautiful Nut, ruler of the sky and stars. Your starry cloak swallows the sun and then reveals the sun again at dawn. As you enfold the whole earth, all things are in your arms. Enfold us too as we welcome the spring. So that's it. And these are my references, if you're interested. But thank you very much.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. And so I know people are going to be excited, want to talk to Elisa about this. One thing that I thought of immediately was the vulture stone at Göbekli Tepe, which is about 6,000 years older, but has a vulture with an ovoid carrying it.
Isn't that interesting?
So interesting. These
Yes.
themes, how they like sprinkle through. So we're gonna take just a quick little break. Usually we're taking 15 minutes, but I want to maybe take 10 so we can close the gap. We're not running too late. Make sure to go check in with Lynette if you want to have a treatment. Anka will be here at 1 to do third eye activations with acupuncture needles, which are incredible. So please do just, enjoy, and we'll be back in about 10 minutes. And for those online, put mute there. For those online, we will be back in just 10 minutes, and we will have Priestess Bria, who will be talking about Ariadne and Cretan mythology. Hi there, Bree. We're just taking a little bit of a break. So we're just like running about 10 minutes later than we thought, but hang out and we'll be right back. I'm so excited for your presentation.
Sounds good. See you in a couple of minutes.
And is there somebody here who would be willing? Can I ask you about your necklace? Hold on one second here. Mia? Hey, Mia, could you come help me with this audio thing again? So I just turned this on and now I don't know how to get the audio how I want it.
Okay, I quit your music app.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Teamwork.
Teamwork. And if there's someone here who wouldn't mind, maybe Bree, if you're there, or someone who's right there who wouldn't mind pulling yourself off mute so that we can do a little mic check. And just say
Oh,
something.
I can do a mic check.
Okay, great. So hang on here. Let me.
A lot of the stuff about Newt reminds me of everything we were taught about the Mother of God, like the Queen of Heaven and stuff. It seems like it's all kind of like the
Derivative of
Yeah.
that. Okay, let's see here. Sorry, honey, I'm just doing a sound check, but I'm super excited about what you're saying. Okay, oh,
Testing.
okay, that actually is great. Go ahead and say something again.
Testing. 1, 2, 3.
I think I need to get the expert back here.
Hey,
Hi,
how are you?
I'm doing okay. Okay, will you say something again, Bree? Sorry.
Yeah. Testing. 1, 2, 3.
I'm still having this issue. Mia just fixed it.
I'll go into what is
Oh, okay.
technically our system.
Okay, good. Now go ahead and say something again.
Testing. Testing. Is it better?
You know, Mia had this working for me perfectly yesterday. So as soon as she comes back, she'll be able to do it again, I'm sure. But I'm struggling personally with this, getting this Bluetooth to Bluetooth properly. So hang on one sec. Let me go get, oh, maybe Cosette can help. Cosette, I'm having the same issue. I don't know how to get this sound to go through this box. It was working great yesterday, but then I think it undid itself. All right, here comes the expert. Thank you so much.
So where's your Bluetooth connection?
It's right up here. The little
Okay, yeah, I see
room.
it.
And then I have it on and I have it connected.
What is this thing called?
This is called the access.
This one here?
And it's just getting the. So then it starts my music app.
Yeah, that's right. So we don't want that. What do you want to play?
I want to play this.
Okay, we just need to test something. Here's your browser. Here we go. Just to see if it's working. It's working now.
Okay, it's
Coming
working.
through.
All right, so then, oh, here, let me stop recording for a sec too.
Who's presenting next?
Next, we have, Bree.